The room was shining with golden chandeliers, sparkling glasses, and the soft hum of conversation from people dressed in the finest clothes. Everyone moved gracefully, holding delicate drinks and talking in polite voices, laughing lightly as if the walls themselves had been built to hold their power and wealth. In the middle of all this elegance, a young waitress moved quietly, balancing a tray with drinks and plates. She wore a simple uniform, nothing fancy, and tried her best to stay unnoticed among the important guests. She knew her job was to serve, not to be seen, but she could feel eyes occasionally glancing at her, some curious, some dismissive. The young woman had been working at this place for a while. She knew the routine, how to keep her hands steady even when the trays were heavy, how to smile politely, and how to avoid drawing attention. But tonight felt different. There was an energy in the air, something tense and sharp, like the calm before a storm. The guests were not just here to enjoy a meal. They were here to be entertained and to show off, and she could feel the weight of their judgment even as she passed by. She was carrying a tray with sparkling water when suddenly she heard a loud, commanding voice that cut through the soft music and chatter. It was the billionaire. The voice wasn't angry, but it had a power that made everyone stop for a moment, a tone that expected immediate obedience. He looked at her with a slight smirk, the kind of smile that made it clear he enjoyed controlling others. "Come here," he said, pointing toward the grand piano at the corner of the room. Everyone nearby turned to see what was happening. She froze for a moment, her heart racing. She wasn't sure why he was calling her out, but she knew from his expression that he expected her to do something. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the tray down on a nearby table. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself it was just another task, just another moment to serve. But deep down, she felt a twist of fear and embarrassment. All eyes were on her now. Guests were whispering quietly, some smiling with curiosity, others with a sense of superiority, as if they already knew she would fail. She had always been careful to stay in the background, to not make a mistake, and suddenly she was being asked to step into the spotlight. She walked slowly toward the piano, her shoes making soft sounds against the polished floor. Every step felt heavier than the last. She could feel her cheeks burning with nervousness. What if she couldn't do what he wanted? What if she made a mistake and everyone laughed? Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them comforting. She wanted to turn around and walk away, but the billionaire's eyes followed her, and she knew that wasn't an option. The guests' whispers grew louder as she approached. Some exchanged looks, trying to guess what would happen next. The atmosphere changed from polite chatter to a tense silence. The soft piano in the background had stopped, and it felt like all attention had shifted to her. She realized she was standing next to the grand piano now. Its polished wood shone under the chandelier light, and the black and white keys seemed intimidating in the quiet room. She touched the edge of the piano gently, trying to calm herself, to remind herself that it was just an instrument. But the presence of the billionaire made it feel like a stage for judgment rather than music. The billionaire leaned casually against a table nearby, his smirk not leaving his face. He seemed confident, as if he was certain of the outcome, certain that she would falter. He said almost teasingly, "Play something for us. Let's see what you've got." The words were simple, but the weight behind them made her heart skip a beat. She had played the piano before, yes, but never in front of a room full of wealthy strangers who expected perfection or humiliation. Her stomach twisted with nerves, and she felt the pressure of every eye on her hands, her posture, even her very presence. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keys. Memories of her childhood came flooding back. How she had discovered the piano in a quiet room, how the sound of each key had felt like magic. She remembered the hours she spent practicing in secret, the joy she felt when the melody flowed smoothly under her fingers. Those memories gave her a tiny spark of courage. She could do this, she told herself. Not for the billionaire, not for the guests, but for herself. This was her talent, her music, and no one could take that away. Taking a deep breath, she seated herself at the piano bench. The polished keys felt cold beneath her fingers. She tried to relax her shoulders, telling herself that this was just like any other practice session. even though it was not. She glanced up briefly, seeing the billionaire watching, waiting, and the small smirk on his face made her angry for a moment. Why should she be embarrassed? Why should she let him control her? That thought made her resolve stronger. She would play not because he demanded it, but because she could. A hush fell over the room as she pressed the first key. The sound was soft, delicate, almost shy. It echoed slightly in the grand hall. Some guests leaned forward, curious, trying to figure out what she would do next. The billionaire's expression did not change, but she noticed a flicker of surprise in his eyes, barely visible. That encouraged her just a little. She played the next few notes carefully, building a melody that she felt in her heart, letting her fingers guide her. As she continued, she began to forget the room, the guests, even the billionaire for a moment. It was just her and the piano, the music flowing from her hands. She realized that the fear was still there, but it was mixed with something new. Excitement, a thrill she hadn't felt in a long time. She could feel the attention of the room shifting, the whispers fading, replaced by focused listening. She had their attention, even if she hadn't planned it. The first part of the song was simple, almost like a warm-up, but it held an emotion that was undeniable. Her fingers moved with a steady rhythm, and she felt her confidence growing. The music became her shield, protecting her from the embarrassment she had feared. The guests were silent, watching in anticipation, and she felt a small smile forming on her lips. This was her moment, even if it had come unexpectedly and under pressure. She took another deep breath and prepared to play the next section, knowing that she had to keep going, to keep the melody alive. The room was waiting, and she would not disappoint herself. She reminded herself that this was not about anyone else. It was about her talent, her courage, and the music that had always been a part of her. The young waitress had stepped out of the background and into the light, and even though the room had intended this to be a moment of humiliation, she was beginning to take control of her own story through the piano. Every note she played added to her growing confidence. The soft hum of the chandelier, the quiet breathing of the guests, and the cold gaze of the billionaire faded into the background. She felt the music rise inside her, and for the first time that evening, she felt free. Free from fear, free from judgment, free to be herself. The piano had always been her secret world, and now she realized that even in the most intimidating room, she could carry that world with her. The first part of this moment had ended with the soft echo of the final note. She lifted her hands slowly, feeling the vibration of the keys beneath her fingers. The room was silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone was holding onto the sound that had just been created. The billionaire blinked, perhaps a little taken aback, and the guests looked around at each other, realizing that something unexpected had just begun. She felt her heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. The stage had been set, and her story had only just started. After finishing the first few soft notes, she paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keys. She could feel every eye in the room on her, but instead of panic, she focused on the feeling of the music itself. The room was quiet now, filled with a tense energy that seemed to expect a mistake. She took a slow, steady breath and let her mind clear. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a spark of determination. She had always played the piano in secret, and she knew she could do this. Memories from her past floated into her mind. She remembered the small living room where she first touched the piano, the sound of each note bringing joy and comfort. She remembered the hours spent practicing, alone in the quiet, perfecting the songs that now felt like part of her. The piano had always been her escape, a place where she could express herself freely. Those memories gave her courage. She reminded herself that the room, the guests, and even the billionaire were just background noise. The music belonged to her. Slowly, she pressed the keys again, letting the melody build naturally. At first, it was soft and gentle, each note deliberate. Then it grew stronger, richer, filling the hall with sound. The guests shifted in their seats, surprised by the depth of emotion coming from someone they had barely noticed a moment ago. They had expected hesitation, awkwardness, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, they were hearing skill, confidence, and a unique voice in the music. The billionaire leaned forward slightly, his smirk fading as he listened. He had thought this would be a moment of power for him, a chance to embarrass someone he considered beneath him. But as the music flowed, he realized he had underestimated her. There was control, elegance, and emotion in every note. He could feel the room responding too. The silence was no longer tense but captivated. People were leaning in, eyes fixed on her hands as they danced across the keys. Her confidence grew with each note. The music was no longer just a song. It was her story, her voice, and her courage expressed without words. She could feel the room listening, not judging, but absorbing the beauty she was creating. The simple act of playing became a shield against the anxiety she had felt when first called out. She was no longer a waitress in a uniform. She was a musician, and for the first time that evening, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. She remembered all the times she had doubted herself, wondering if anyone would ever hear her music. Tonight, unexpectedly, everyone was listening. She realized that fear could be transformed into power when channeled through something she loved. She let the notes flow naturally, improvising slightly as she followed her emotions. The piano responded to her touch like an extension of herself, echoing the confidence and determination building within her. Guests were whispering quietly now, but not out of mockery. They were whispering in surprise and admiration, noticing how someone they had overlooked could suddenly capture their attention so completely. Some faces showed genuine amazement. Others were intrigued, trying to understand the source of this unexpected talent. The young woman kept her focus on the music, ignoring the murmurs, letting each note speak for her. She didn't need anyone to validate her talent. The sound itself was enough. The billionaire straightened, his initial arrogance replaced with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. He had seen power, influence, and control in every form imaginable, but he hadn't expected to feel this way, astonished and humbled by a simple waitress who had been quietly serving drinks moments ago. The power dynamic had shifted without a word. The music had spoken louder than any authority he could assert. She continued to play, now fully immersed in the melody. Each note carried emotion, telling a story that words could never express. She thought about her life, the struggles she had faced, and the dreams she had kept hidden. All of that was pouring out in the music. The room seemed to hold its breath, connected by a shared experience that transcended wealth, status, or expectation. In that moment, everyone was equal, united by the beauty and sincerity of her playing. Her hands moved faster, yet every note was controlled, deliberate, and expressive. She was no longer just performing. She was commanding the attention of the entire room. The music was a bridge between her inner world and the world of the guests, showing them a side of her they had never imagined. They were witnessing courage, talent, and authenticity combined in a way that left them speechless. She glanced up briefly, seeing the astonished expressions of those around her. Some had tears in their eyes, some were leaning forward in awe. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing she had turned fear into strength. The piano had become a voice for her, speaking louder than any words, louder than the billionaire's previous attempts to intimidate. The young woman remembered that she had started this journey not for anyone else, but for herself. That thought kept her grounded even as the applause started to build quietly in the back of the room. She played with her heart, not for approval, not for recognition, but because it was who she was. And yet, it was impossible to ignore the effect she was having. The room was changing, shifting from an atmosphere of judgment to one of admiration and wonder. As the song continued, she felt a sense of calm determination. She was in control now, despite the circumstances that had forced her here. The piano had always been her escape, and tonight it became her weapon, not for harm, but for assertion of her own worth. She realized that power could be found in unexpected places, and for her, it was in the music she had nurtured in silence. The melody grew softer again, returning to the gentle, tender notes she had started with, as if to remind the room of the journey they had experienced with her. The contrast between the quiet beginning and the emotional crescendo highlighted her skill, creativity, and bravery. She felt a wave of satisfaction, knowing she had transformed a moment meant for humiliation into a moment of triumph. As she lifted her hands from the keys, the room held its collective breath for a heartbeat. Then, slowly, applause began to fill the hall. It started as a few claps, then grew louder, more enthusiastic, as people realized the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. She allowed herself a small, quiet smile, feeling the warmth of the recognition, though she did not play for it. The music had been her voice, and now the world was listening. The billionaire, still standing nearby, remained silent for a moment, processing what had happened. His smirk had disappeared completely, replaced by a look of surprise and grudging respect. He had intended to assert power, to put her in a position of vulnerability, and instead she had claimed control. The room's energy had shifted, and he could feel it. The young woman had turned fear into mastery, and there was nothing he could do to change that. As she rose from the piano bench, the applause continued, filling the grand hall. She returned to her place among the staff quietly, but something inside her had changed. She knew that this moment would stay with her forever, a reminder of courage, talent, and the unexpected ways in which life could challenge and reward those who dared to embrace their gifts. The night had started with tension and fear, but it had become a turning point, a moment where humility, talent, and inner strength shone brighter than wealth or status. The young woman had returned to her duties after the applause, carrying plates and drinks with a steady hand, but inside her heart was still racing. She could feel the lingering energy of the room, the quiet awe of the guests who had just witnessed her play. Each step she took felt lighter, as if the music had lifted a weight from her shoulders. She smiled politely when people glanced at her, but her mind was already replaying every note, every moment at the piano. She realized that the fear she had felt before was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of confidence that surprised her. The guests had not forgotten her performance. Small groups whispered to each other, still talking about the melody, the skill, and the emotion she had poured into it. Some had pulled out their phones quietly, trying to capture a glimpse of the moment without interrupting the atmosphere. She could see their faces, curious and amazed, and she realized just how powerful a single act of courage could be. It was not just about the piano. It was about standing up, showing what she was capable of, and letting the world see her talent. The billionaire, who had originally intended to embarrass her, was now standing quietly at the edge of the room. His arms were crossed, his eyes fixed on her. She could feel his gaze, but this time it did not make her anxious. It was no longer a gaze of power. It was a gaze of someone trying to understand what had just happened. There was a flicker of respect in his eyes, though he did not speak. She had turned his expectations upside down without even trying. As she served drinks to the tables, she noticed a few guests nodding to each other, clearly impressed. They whispered about her talent, sharing stories of the music that had moved them. The young woman felt a small surge of pride, not because of recognition or fame, but because she had stayed true to herself even under pressure. She had discovered a strength she did not know she possessed. Each movement she made now felt purposeful, confident, and unshakable. When the next course was served, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The guests were still elegant and poised, but their demeanor had changed. They were no longer just observers. They were witnesses to something unexpected, something real. Her presence alone commanded attention, and she could feel the subtle energy of respect in the room. It was remarkable how a single performance could alter perceptions so completely. She caught sight of the piano again, gleaming under the chandeliers. Her fingers itched, remembering the feel of the keys beneath them. A quiet thought crossed her mind. Perhaps she could play again, just for herself this time. The idea was tempting, but she reminded herself that she was still on duty, and there were responsibilities she could not ignore. Even so, the music had become a part of her, a source of inner strength she could carry anywhere. The guests continued to talk quietly, some moving closer to watch her work. They were intrigued, curious about this young woman who had turned an ordinary night into an unforgettable moment. She noticed one older guest, who had been particularly reserved, leaning forward slightly, his expression one of genuine admiration. He seemed to understand the depth of what she had shared without words, recognizing the courage it took to step forward and the skill it took to capture everyone's attention. She moved through the room, offering polite smiles and answering brief questions about drinks or dishes. All the while, she could feel the silent acknowledgement of her talent lingering in the air. It was as if the music had opened a door, allowing people to see her not as a waitress in a uniform but as a person with depth, passion, and skill. Every interaction she had felt richer because of it, more connected, more meaningful. The billionaire approached her quietly, his steps deliberate. She noticed his serious expression and wondered what he would say. He did not speak immediately but watched her work for a few moments, as if studying her carefully. Finally, he spoke in a tone that was calm and neutral, without the arrogance he had displayed earlier. "You have a remarkable talent," he said simply. The words were not loud, but they carried weight. She felt a mix of surprise and satisfaction. It was a rare acknowledgement from someone who had expected to see her falter. She nodded politely, not needing to say much. The recognition was enough. She realized that the encounter had changed something inside her. She was no longer just a young woman doing her job. She was someone who had faced fear, embraced her talent, and earned respect in an unexpected way. The music had been her voice, and now that voice had left an impression she knew would last. As the evening continued, she found herself moving with a sense of calm confidence. Every tray she carried, every dish she served, felt like a small act of grace, informed by the courage she had discovered at the piano. The guests responded differently too, their manner more considerate, their glances tinged with curiosity and admiration. She had changed the energy of the room without even trying, simply by being true to herself. A few younger guests approached her, quietly asking if she would play again later in the evening. She smiled and thanked them, explaining gently that she was working, but the requests made her feel a sense of pride. People remembered her, not as a server who disappeared into the background, but as someone who had captured a moment in their memory. It was a powerful feeling, one that made all the earlier fear seem small and distant. The music still echoed in her mind, each note a reminder of the transformation she had experienced. She realized that this night had taught her something important. Courage could appear in the most unlikely moments, and talent could shine even when circumstances seemed unfair. She had faced humiliation, but she had turned it into triumph, and that was a lesson she would carry forward forever. Even as she moved through the final rounds of serving, she noticed subtle changes in the way people treated her. Small gestures, polite nods, and sincere smiles showed that they saw her differently now. The piano had not just displayed her skill. It had revealed her character, her resilience, and her inner strength. She felt proud, not for applause or recognition, but because she had stayed true to herself when it mattered most. The billionaire observed quietly from across the room, occasionally glancing at her with a thoughtful expression. It was clear that he had been surprised by more than just the music. He had witnessed confidence, grace, and courage, all displayed without arrogance or pretense. He had learned, perhaps reluctantly, that true talent could not be controlled or underestimated. She had claimed her own space in the room, not through defiance but through excellence, and he could not ignore it. The rest of the evening unfolded with a quiet sense of admiration toward her. Guests spoke of the piano performance even as they enjoyed the rest of the night. The young woman continued her work, moving with calm efficiency and an ease that surprised even herself. She had discovered a new rhythm to her movements, a sense of purpose that was informed by the courage she had shown at the piano. Each step, each gesture, was part of a new confidence that would stay with her long after the night ended. As the final guests left and the room grew quieter, she allowed herself a deep breath of relief and satisfaction. The fear that had once threatened to overwhelm her was gone, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and pride. She knew that this night would be remembered, not just for the performance, but for the way she had transformed a moment of pressure into one of triumph. The experience had changed her, giving her a new understanding of what she was capable of and how she could face challenges in the future with courage and grace. As the night continued, A quiet calm settled over the room, but the memory of her performance lingered in every corner. The young woman moved through the space with a sense of ease she had never experienced before. Each tray she carried, each drink she poured, seemed lighter, as if the piano had shifted something deep inside her. The energy from the music stayed with her, giving her a quiet strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She had discovered a part of herself that was both resilient and brave, and it made everything else feel different, almost brighter. The guests continued to talk about her performance, sharing their admiration quietly among themselves. Some had been skeptical at first, expecting an awkward display, but what they had seen had completely changed their perception. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to break the elegance of the evening, but their words carried amazement and respect. The young woman noticed the subtle shift, seeing how people now treated her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. It was not something she had ever experienced before, and it made her heart swell quietly with pride. The billionaire was observing as well, leaning slightly against the table with his arms crossed. His earlier confidence had faded into thoughtful attention. He had expected a moment of control, but instead, he had witnessed courage and talent, qualities he had not anticipated. There was a certain quiet respect in his eyes now, an acknowledgement that she had achieved something remarkable without needing to say a word. He had tried to assert power, and she had subtly reclaimed it, using her skill and inner strength. The young woman found a moment to breathe and let her thoughts settle. She realized that the piano had become more than just an instrument. It was a source of her voice, a way to express herself without words. In that quiet reflection, she understood that this night had transformed her, not just in the eyes of the guests but in her own understanding of what she was capable of. Fear had been present, yes, but it had been replaced with determination, courage, and self-respect. As she moved between the tables, serving the remaining courses, she felt a connection with the people in the room that she had never experienced before. They were seeing her not as a waitress in uniform but as a person with depth and talent. The small gestures of acknowledgement, the polite nods, and the occasional words of appreciation all reminded her that she had made an impact. It was not fame or recognition that mattered most. It was the quiet respect she had earned simply by staying true to herself. Her thoughts wandered back to the piano, imagining the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, the sound of each note echoing through the grand hall. She could still feel the rhythm of the melody in her mind, each note a reminder of the power of courage and authenticity. It was a sensation that stayed with her, subtle but persistent, reinforcing the lesson she had learned. Even in a world where power and status seemed to dominate, talent and integrity could shine brightly. The guests were slowly finishing their meals, and the room had settled into a gentle, comfortable quiet. People were leaning back in their chairs, sipping drinks, and reflecting on the evening. The young woman moved gracefully among them, attentive but not rushed, aware of the lingering impact of her earlier performance. It was clear that the memory of her playing had left an impression that would remain long after the night ended. She noticed a few guests approaching the piano again, looking at it with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. The instrument had become a symbol of something more than music. It represented courage, expression, and personal triumph. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had transformed an ordinary object into a source of inspiration for others. The thought made her smile softly to herself, a private acknowledgement of her growth and achievement. The billionaire stepped closer, his gaze thoughtful. He spoke quietly, without the commanding tone he had used before. "You have a rare talent," he said, his voice calm but sincere. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she could feel. She acknowledged him with a nod, grateful for the recognition but not needing it to validate herself. The evening had already given her everything she needed. A sense of accomplishment, confidence, and the realization that she could rise to any challenge. The young woman continued her work, moving between tables with efficiency and grace. Each step she took felt lighter, more deliberate, informed by the strength she had discovered at the piano. The guests responded in kind, their demeanor warm and appreciative. She realized that the impact of her music had extended beyond the notes themselves. It had changed the way people saw her and, more importantly, the way she saw herself. Time passed quickly as the night wore on, and soon the last guests were leaving. The young woman helped tidy the space, her movements confident and purposeful. She reflected on the journey of the evening, from the initial fear of being called to the piano to the triumph of playing with courage and authenticity. It had been an unexpected test, but one that had revealed her true strength. In the quiet moments after the guests had departed, she allowed herself to sit at the piano again. The room was empty, still filled with the echoes of the evening. She touched the keys gently, letting her fingers move over them, reliving the music she had played. The piano felt familiar and comforting, a reminder of the talent and courage she had embraced. She realized that this instrument would always be a part of her, a source of expression and a symbol of her resilience. She thought about the lessons of the night, that fear could be transformed into courage, that talent could shine even under pressure, and that true strength came from staying true to oneself. The experience had changed her in ways that went beyond the applause or recognition. It had changed how she saw herself and her abilities. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected challenge, knowing that it had allowed her to discover a side of herself she might never have known otherwise. The young woman stood and looked around the empty hall, the chandeliers casting soft reflections on the polished floor. She knew that the night would remain with her, a memory of courage, talent, and personal triumph. The experience had been transformative, not because of the audience or the applause, but because of the confidence, resilience, and authenticity she had found within herself. It was a lesson that would stay with her forever, guiding her through future challenges with the quiet strength she had discovered at the piano. The next day began with a quiet calm, but the young woman could still feel the echoes of the previous night lingering in her mind. Even as she went about her usual work, carrying trays and attending to guests, there was a new energy inside her, a confidence that had not been there before. The memory of the piano, the music she had played, and the way the room had responded stayed with her, a reminder of the courage she had discovered. It was a feeling that gave her strength and inspired her to approach each task with quiet assurance. Guests returned to the restaurant, unaware of the transformation the young woman had undergone. She greeted them with the same polite smile, but there was a subtle difference in her demeanor. She moved with a natural grace and poise that made her presence feel calm and comforting. The previous night had taught her that she could handle pressure, that she could shine even when all eyes were on her. It was a lesson she carried into every interaction, making her more confident and attentive in ways that guests noticed. Word about her performance at the piano had spread quietly among the elite circles. Some guests, who had been there the night before, returned with a sense of curiosity and anticipation. They wanted to see the young woman again, to witness the person who had transformed a simple evening into something unforgettable. They approached her with polite questions and small gestures of recognition, and she responded with warmth and humility. She had earned their respect, not through arrogance or seeking attention, but through her talent and authenticity. The young woman found moments during her shift to reflect on what had happened. The experience had been more than just a test of skill. It had been a test of courage and self-belief. She remembered the fear that had gripped her when called to the piano, the racing heart, and the trembling hands. Yet, she also remembered the determination that had pushed her forward, the joy of letting the music flow, and the satisfaction of seeing the audience captivated. Those memories strengthened her, reminding her that she could face challenges with grace and confidence. As the day progressed, she noticed subtle changes in the way people interacted with her. Guests were more attentive, offering kind words or small gestures of appreciation. Colleagues and co-workers treated her with a new level of respect, sensing the quiet strength she now carried. It was remarkable how a single act of courage could shift perceptions so completely, and she felt both proud and humbled by the response. She understood that her actions had left an impression, not just in the room where the piano stood, but in the minds and hearts of those who had witnessed her talent. During a brief pause in her duties, the young woman allowed herself to approach the piano once more. The room was empty, quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint reflections of sunlight on the polished wood. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, feeling the familiar coldness beneath her fingertips. Memories of the previous night came rushing back, the first hesitant notes, the crescendo of confidence, the captivated audience. She played softly, letting the music flow naturally, reliving the courage and joy she had discovered. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a source of expression, a voice for her emotions and thoughts. As she played, she realized that the experience had taught her a valuable lesson about herself. She could embrace challenges, overcome fear, and shine in unexpected moments. The music was a reminder that talent and courage were powerful, especially when combined with authenticity and determination. It was a lesson she intended to carry forward in every aspect of her life. Later, as she returned to serving guests, she felt a quiet confidence in her steps and movements. Each interaction was guided by a calm assurance that came from knowing she had faced fear and triumphed. She noticed the subtle ways guests responded to her presence, the gentle smiles, the attentive listening, and the polite gestures of acknowledgement. The respect she had earned was not superficial. It was a recognition of her inner strength and talent. The young woman also reflected on the impact of the experience on the billionaire. He had approached the evening expecting to assert control and perhaps humiliate her, but instead, he had witnessed courage and skill that commanded attention. She realized that moments of challenge often reveal more about others than ourselves. His reaction had shifted from arrogance to respect, and she had shown that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in talent, resilience, and integrity. As the day moved on, the young woman found herself thinking about the opportunities that could come from this moment. She did not seek fame or recognition, but she understood that her talent could open doors she had never imagined. The piano had been her secret world, and now it was a world that others had glimpsed, one that could lead to growth, new experiences, and personal fulfillment. The thought filled her with hope and determination for the future. Throughout the day, she maintained a sense of balance and focus. She attended to her duties with care and attention, but she also allowed herself moments of reflection and gratitude. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of private practice, the dedication to her craft, and the moments of doubt she had overcome. Each note played, each challenge faced, had built the foundation for the courage she now carried. It was a reminder that preparation and persistence can lead to unexpected triumphs. As the evening approached, the young woman prepared for another busy night at the restaurant. She felt a sense of readiness and calm that had not been present before. The memory of her performance and the response of the audience gave her confidence that she could handle whatever challenges the night might bring. She moved with a quiet strength, knowing that her talent and courage were tools she could rely on at any moment. The night began with a steady flow of guests, each interaction guided by the confidence she had gained. She noticed how the staff and patrons alike treated her with renewed respect and consideration. The piano, still gleaming in the corner, remained a silent reminder of her triumph. She did not need to play again to prove herself. The experience had already transformed her, giving her the assurance that she could face challenges with courage and skill. Throughout the evening, small moments reinforced the lessons she had learned. Guests complimented her, some asking questions about her music, others expressing admiration for her poise and confidence. She responded with humility and grace, understanding that her strength lay not in seeking approval, but in embracing her abilities and staying true to herself. Each interaction was a subtle reminder of the impact she had made, not through words, but through action and talent. As the night drew to a close, the young woman reflected on the journey she had taken. What began as a moment of fear and potential humiliation had become a turning point, a moment of personal triumph and growth. She had discovered the power of courage, the value of authenticity, and the strength that comes from embracing one's talents. The experience had changed her, leaving an indelible mark that would influence her future in ways she could not yet fully understand. Sitting quietly for a moment, she allowed herself to appreciate the journey. The piano, the music, and the audience had all played a role in revealing her inner strength. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and commanded respect in a way that was both subtle and profound. The lessons of the evening would stay with her, guiding her through future challenges and reminding her that courage, talent, and integrity are the true measures of strength. As the staff finished closing up, the young woman took one last look around the empty room. The chandeliers reflected softly on the polished floors, and the piano stood silently in the corner, a witness to her journey. She knew that this experience was only the beginning, that her talent and courage could lead her to new opportunities and personal growth. The night had shown her what was possible when she faced fear with determination, and she carried that lesson with her, ready to embrace whatever came next. The following morning, the young woman arrived at work with a quiet sense of anticipation. She had spent the previous night reflecting on all that had happened: the piano, the audience, the billionaire, and most importantly, the courage she had discovered within herself. Even though she would be returning to her regular duties, something had shifted. She carried herself with a new poise, a quiet confidence that could be felt even before she spoke. Each step she took through the restaurant seemed lighter, more deliberate, as if the world itself had adjusted to accommodate the strength she now felt within. The staff noticed a change as well. Colleagues who had once treated her with casual indifference now acknowledged her with small nods and polite smiles. There was a sense of respect in the way they observed her movements, the way she handled tasks with calm precision. She understood that respect is not demanded, but earned through integrity and action, and the events of the previous night had proven that in an unforgettable way. As she carried trays of food and drinks to tables, she felt the subtle impact of her performance lingering in the room. Some guests arrived having heard of her talent and sought her out, curious to see the young woman who had silenced a room with a single song. They watched her work, observing the quiet grace and confidence she carried, and for many, it was inspiring. The young woman greeted them politely, answering questions with humility, never seeking to make herself the center of attention, but recognizing that her talent had naturally drawn admiration. At one table, a couple of regulars commented softly among themselves, clearly still impressed by the previous night's performance. The young woman overheard snippets of conversation praising her skill, noting the emotional depth in her music, and expressing amazement that such talent could be found in someone so young and seemingly ordinary. She allowed herself a small, private smile, feeling both pride and humility. It was a reminder that her courage had not only impacted her own life, but had left a lasting impression on others. Throughout the morning, she found small moments to glance at the piano in the corner. It stood as a silent witness to her growth, a symbol of what was possible when fear was faced and talent was embraced. She imagined sitting down once again, letting her fingers move across the keys, feeling the music flow naturally. Even in the midst of her busy day, the memory of the performance gave her a sense of calm strength and purpose. The billionaire returned to the restaurant later that day, though he did not command attention as he had before. His demeanor was different, less forceful, more observant. He approached her quietly, his expression one of genuine interest rather than authority. "You have something special," he said, his voice calm and sincere. The words were not boastful or performative. They were honest. The young woman nodded politely, grateful for the acknowledgement but not needing it to define her sense of self. The recognition was secondary to the lesson she had learned, that her courage and talent had already changed her life in meaningful ways. As she continued her duties, she noticed the guests' reactions were different as well. They treated her with a new level of respect, engaging her politely and thoughtfully. Conversations flowed easily, and there was a quiet admiration in the way people observed her movements. The young woman realized that what had begun as a moment of fear and vulnerability had transformed into a lasting demonstration of her strength and capability. She felt empowered by the knowledge that she could face challenges and emerge stronger, no matter the circumstances. During a brief pause, she allowed herself to approach the piano again. The room was empty except for the gentle reflections of sunlight on the polished wood and the quiet hum of the restaurant's activity in the background. She seated herself, placed her fingers on the keys, and let the music flow freely. Each note felt natural, expressive, and unforced. She played softly at first, allowing the melody to guide her, then gradually built it into a richer, more confident sound. It was a reminder of the triumph she had achieved, not for recognition or praise, but for herself. As the music filled the quiet room, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a voice for her courage, her resilience, and her talent. She realized that the events of the previous night had opened a door to new opportunities, new experiences, and a renewed sense of self-worth. The audience's admiration had been a pleasant acknowledgement, but the true value lay in what she had discovered within herself: the power of facing fear, trusting in her abilities, and expressing her authentic self. When she finished playing, she lifted her hands slowly, allowing the final notes to linger in the air. The room was silent for a heartbeat, and she smiled softly, feeling the satisfaction of accomplishment. This was a personal victory, one that would stay with her for a lifetime. She returned to her duties with a renewed sense of purpose, moving through the restaurant with calm assurance and poise. The day continued, and the young woman found herself reflecting on the lessons she had learned. She understood that life often presents moments of fear or uncertainty, but it is in those moments that courage can shine. Talent and determination, when combined with authenticity, have the power to change perceptions and inspire others. She had faced a challenge, embraced her abilities, and demonstrated that strength and resilience are found within, not in the approval or control of others. As evening approached, the restaurant became busier, and she moved efficiently, her confidence evident in every action. The piano remained a silent companion, reminding her of the night when she had stepped forward and claimed her own space. She felt a quiet excitement, knowing that her journey was not over, that there were more opportunities to grow, to share her talent, and to face challenges with courage. The events of the previous night had set her on a new path, one where she could trust in herself and her abilities. The guests responded warmly to her presence, some offering kind words, others expressing interest in hearing her play again. She smiled and thanked them, explaining that her duties required attention, but the requests made her heart feel full. It was a reminder that talent, courage, and authenticity resonate with people naturally, even without seeking attention or praise. She had discovered that true strength comes from within, and it could leave a lasting impact on the world around her. The billionaire observed quietly from a distance, his earlier intentions of control now replaced by a subtle acknowledgement of her abilities. He had witnessed courage and skill displayed without arrogance, and he could not ignore the quiet power she carried. The young woman had transformed a moment of potential humiliation into a demonstration of her own strength, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. As the night drew to a close, she helped with closing tasks, her movements deliberate and calm. She reflected on the journey from fear to triumph, from doubt to confidence. The experience had been transformative, revealing her resilience, talent, and the power of facing challenges with grace. She understood that the lessons learned would continue to guide her in the future, reminding her that courage and authenticity are the true measures of strength. Finally, as the restaurant emptied and the room grew quiet, she approached the piano one last time. Sitting down, she played softly, allowing the notes to flow naturally. The music was gentle and expressive, a reflection of her journey, her growth, and the courage she had embraced. Each note carried the strength of her experience, a reminder of what she had achieved and what she was capable of. As she finished, she lifted her hands and smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The night had started with fear and uncertainty, but it had ended with triumph, growth, and self-discovery. The piano had been her voice, the music her expression, and the audience a witness to the power of courage. She knew that this experience would stay with her forever, shaping her future and reminding her that strength, talent, and authenticity can change the course of a life. She stood, took a final glance around the empty room, and left with a sense of peace and confidence. The journey was complete, but her story had only begun. She understood that her abilities, courage, and determination would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead, and that the lessons of that night would remain a source of inspiration and strength for the rest of her life.